Welcome dear students. This is the 7th video on practice problem for accounts of not-for-profit concerns. Today we will be solving sum number 14 on page number 123 of your government textbook. So let's read sum number 14. Sum number 14. Following information has been provided by Vivekanand Charitable Hospital, Latur. You are required to prepare income and expenditure account for the year ending on 31st March 2019 and balance sheet as on that date. Now students, if you see again, this is a second type of question wherein an opening balance sheet is given. Then receipts and payment account is given, followed by adjustment. So let's understand the pattern of how we can solve the sum. We will first begin with receipts and payment and do the identification. Then we will read the balance sheet and do the markings in the receipts and payment. In case if the names do not appear in receipts and payment side, then we will indicate it with a sign. Finally, we will read the adjustments and do the markings in receipts and payment. We will now begin with step number 1, reading of receipts and payment and doing identification. Before we read receipts and payment, let us recall the symbols. On the receipt side, we will have income, which will be indicated with the symbol I, liability, which will be indicated with the symbol L, and there could also be sale of asset. On the payment side, we will have expense, which will be indicated with the symbol E, and assets, which will be indicated with the symbol A. So let's begin step number 1, identification on the receipt side. To balance brought down is my opening cash balance. Opening cash balance is never considered. So we will mark a cross. Subscription income. Life membership fees income. Hospital receipts is given for revenue, which means income. We will now move on to the payment side. Purchase of drugs expense. There is an information given to us that this purchase of drugs includes 40,000 for 17 and 18. My year is ending on 2019, which means this is the expense which is with regard to our previous year. So we have to make a note of this, students. Next is salary to staff. It's an expense. Honorarium to doctors, expense. Repairs and maintenance, expense. Furniture, asset. General expense, expense. Balance carried down is my closing cash balance, which will go on the asset side. With this, we have completed step number 1, identification. We will now begin with step number 2, reading of balance sheet and adjustment and marking star in receipts and payment. Now students, before we begin reading our opening balance sheet, let us recall the 4 most important points. Opening balance sheet will always have only one effect. Any kind of assets or liabilities, we will always add it. Outstanding expenses or income, we will always subtract. Prepaid expenses or income, we will always add. So these are the 4 important points that we need to recall. Let's begin from the liability side. Capital fund. This is my opening capital, which will be written on the liability side. bank loan, again on our liability side. Outstanding bill for drugs. I have to check if I have bill for drugs. So on the payment side, I have drugs. So I'll mark a star. We will now move on to the asset side. Building. Let's have a look. So on the payment side, I do not have building, which means I will put a plus sign. Next is ambulance. We have already gone to our payment side. We know there is no ambulance, which means we will also have to add ambulance. Next is stock of drugs. This is nothing but my opening stock of drugs, and I have drugs on the payment side. So I will mark a star again for drugs. Next is hospital equipment. Again on my payment side, I do not have a hospital equipment, so I'll put a plus sign. Next is cash in hand. This is my opening balances of cash in hand. Opening balances we do not consider. With this, students, we have completed reading our balance sheet. We will now continue with our second step, that is reading of adjustment. Please make a note, students, while doing adjustments always have two effects. So let's read the adjustments and mark star in our receipts and payment. Adjustment number 1. On 31st March 2019, stock of drugs was valued at rupees 22,000. Again, I have to mark star for stock of drugs. So for drugs, I'll mark a star. Adjustment number 2. Depreciation on building at 5% per annum and on ambulance rupees 30,000. Which means I have to mark star for building and ambulance. Now students, if you look at the payment side, we do not have building, we do not have ambulance, which means we will mark star in our balance sheet. So in the balance sheet on the asset side, I will mark star for building and for ambulance. Adjustment number 3. Life membership fees are to be capitalized, which means I have to mark star for life membership fees. So on the receipt side, I have life membership fees. I'll mark a star. With this, students, we have completed step number 2, reading of balance sheet and adjustments and marking star in receipts and payment. We will now begin with step number 3, writing in the inner and outer column. Students, please make a note. The ones which are marked star will be written in the inner column, and the ones which are not marked star will be written in the outer column. So let's begin from the receipt side. To balance brought down is my opening cash balance, which I do not consider. Next is subscription, which will be written on the income side. So I'll write by subscription. There is no star, so I'll write it directly in the outer column, 2,22,000. Next is life membership fees. On my income side, I'll write by life membership fees. There is a star, so I'll mark a star and write it in the inner column, 30,000. Next is hospital receipts. Again on the income side, I'll write by hospital receipts. Since there is no star, I'll write it in the outer column, 5,10,400. With this, students, we have completed receipt side. We will now begin from the payment side. I have purchase of drugs. So on the expenditure side, I'll write to purchase of drugs. Since there are 3 stars, I'll mark 3 stars. And I'll write the amount in the inner column, 2 lakh rupees. We have to remember there is an information given for purchase of drugs, which we will do it while we are doing balance sheet because it is related to our previous year. Let's go to the next one. Salary to staff. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to salary to staff. There is no star in the outer column, 85,000. Next is honorarium to doctors. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to honorarium to doctors. In the outer column, 4 lakh. Next is repairs and maintenance. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to repairs and maintenance. In the outer column, 18,000. Next is furniture. So on the asset side, I'll write furniture. There is no star in the outer column, 45,000. Next is general reserve on the expenditure side. So on the expenditure side, I'll write to general expenses. In the outer column, 16,000. Next is balance carried down. It is nothing but my closing cash balance, which I'll write on the asset side. I'll write closing cash balance. In the outer column, 2,400. With this, students, we have completed step number 3, writing it in the inner and the outer column. We'll now start with step number 4. We will first begin with balance sheet. Students, please make a note. This is my opening balance sheet. Opening balance sheet has only one effect. Let's begin from the liability side. Capital fund of 11 lakh rupees, which I'll write it on the liability side. So on the liability side, I will write capital. In the inner column, 11 lakh. Next is bank loan, 6,50,000, again on the liability side. So on the liability side, I'll leave some few 5 to 6 lines and then I will write bank loan. In the outer column, 6,50,000. Next is outstanding bill for drugs, rupees 50,000. For this, students, we will have to see on the payment side. So if you look at the payment side, it says that for purchase of drugs includes 40,000 for 17 and 18. That means for previous year it includes 40,000. You know, students, income and expenditure account is prepared only for current year. So if it is related to previous year, I will have to minus. So I'll say less for previous year, which includes 40,000. So I'll minus 40,000. So from 2 lakh, I'll minus 40,000. I'll get 1,60,000 still in the inner column. Our outstanding bill for drugs was actually rupees 50,000. But we had done a payment of only 40,000, which means there is a difference in the amount. So there is a difference of 10,000 rupees, which means it is still payable. So we will have a second effect for this. So we will have an effect on the liability side. So on the liability side, I will write outstanding bill for drugs, rupees 10,000 in the outer column. Students, I hope you are clear with purchase of drugs previous year. Now, as told to you, balance sheet has always only one effect. But in the theory, we have explained to you, if there is a difference in the amount, then the difference amount will have a second effect. So since our balance sheet had an amount of rupees 50,000 which was payable, out of that 40,000 is already been paid. So there is still a difference of 10,000, and that is why the difference of 10,000 had a second effect. I hope you have understood this very clearly. We will now begin from the asset side. Building. So I'll write it on the asset side. Building. There is a star. So I'll write it in the inner column, 10,50,000. Next is ambulance. Again, I'll add it on the asset side and there is a star. So on the asset side, I'll write ambulance. I'll mark a star and write it in the inner column, 4 lakh rupees. Next is stock of drugs. This is opening stock of drugs, which I will write it on the expenditure side. So on the expenditure side, I will write add opening stock of drugs, which is rupees 42,000. I'll still write it in the inner column. Now I will add it 1,60,000 plus 42 will give me 2,02,000 still in the inner column because there is another star. And since it's an opening stock of drugs, opening will have only one effect. Next is hospital equipment. Again, I will add it on the asset side and there is no star. So I'll write it in the outer column. So on the asset side, I will write hospital equipment. In the outer column, 3,04,000. Next is cash in hand. It is my opening balances of cash in hand. Opening balance of cash in hand we do not consider. So with this, students, we have completed balance sheet. We will continue with our step number 4, doing our adjustments. Please make a note, adjustments always have two effects. Let's begin with the first adjustment. On 31st March 2019, this is my closing balance. So closing stock of drugs was valued at rupees 22,000. So closing stock of drugs, so I will write it on the expenditure side. So on the expenditure side, closing stock of drugs is always minus. So I'll say less closing stock of drugs, which is 22,000. So 2,02,000 minus 22,000 will give me 1,80,000 in the outer column. This is closing stock. Closing stock will always have a second effect. So my second effect will be on the asset side. I will write down closing stock of drugs. In the outer column, 22,000. Adjustment number 2, depreciation on building at 5% per annum and on ambulance rupees 30,000. We will first do depreciation on building at 5%. Let's do the first effect. So for building, I'll say less dep at the rate of 5%. So 10,50,000, 5% will be 52,500. I can now minus it. 10,50,000 minus 52,500 will give me 9,97,500. This is my first effect for depreciation on building. Second effect for depreciation on building will be on the expenditure side. So I'll write down to dep on building. In the outer column, 52,500. We'll continue with adjustment number 2. Depreciation on ambulance rupees 30,000. So let's do the first effect. So on the asset side, I'll say less dep 30,000. So 4 lakh minus 30,000 will give me 3,70,000 in the outer column. This is my first effect for depreciation on ambulance. Second effect for depreciation on ambulance will be on the expenditure side, since it's an expense. So I'll write 2 dep on ambulance. In the outer column, 30,000. Adjustment number 3. Life membership fees are to be capitalized. So we have to capitalize life membership fees. So let's do the first effect. So on the income side, I have life membership fees. I'll say less capitalize. Entire amount 30,000. So in the outer column, it will be dash. Now I have to add it to my capital. So on the capital, I'll say add life membership fees. 30,000. With this, students, I have completed step number 4, doing the balance sheet and adjustment. Now begin with step number 5, closing the books of account. We will first close our income and expenditure account. So we will first total the expenditure side. So on the expenditure side, when I total the amount, I get a total of 7,81,500. Now I will total the income side. So when I total the income side, I get a total of 7,32,400. Now we will follow ledger format. Double underline on both the side. Bigger total to be written on both the sides. So I have 7,81,500, which I'll write on both the sides. Now from the bigger total, I will minus the smaller total. So 7,81,500 minus 7,32,400. So I get a balance of 49,100, which I'll write on top. Now students, my expenditure is more than my income. So when expenditure is more than income, which means the concern has got a deficit. So I'll write by deficit carried down. In the bracket, I will write excess of expenditure over income. Now since the concern has got a deficit, we will write less deficit. 49,100. We will now total the capital amount. So 11 lakh plus 30,000 minus 49,100. Get a balance of 10,80,900. Now in the same manner, I will total liability side. So when I total liability side, I get a total of 17,40,900. Now in the same manner, we will total the asset side. So when we total the asset side, I get the same total as the liability. That is 17,40,900. With this, students, we have tallied our balance sheet, and I hope you have understood the sum.